Thanks for watching. Eleanor Vance had an eye for quality. Her small, perfectly curated apartment was a showcase of impeccable taste, a museum of one, filled with treasures found after years of dedicated antiquing. She lived for the thrill of the hunt, the discovery of a real deal. So when an ad popped up on Craigslist, her heart skipped a beat. Rare Chippendale-style dresser, must go today, it read. This was it. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. The seller was a gruff man named Barry. His house smelled of sawdust and old regrets, a chaotic jumble of what he dismissed as inherited junk. And there, standing amongst stacks of yellowed newspapers and sad, deflated exercise balls, was the dresser. It was magnificent. It was a solid piece of dark, rich wood, adorned with intricate carvings. Eleanor felt a surge of triumph. She approached it cautiously, running a gloved hand over the detailed brass pulls. "Chippendale, you say?" she asked, her voice a careful blend of nonchalance and expertise. Her mind was already racing, placing the piece in her living room, imagining the envy of her friends. A bit unusual for the period, she mused aloud, mostly to herself. Perhaps the Chippendale variant. Barry just grunted. He clearly didn't care about its history. He just wanted it gone. The price he quoted was so low it was almost offensive. Eleanor smiled inwardly. Barry's ignorance was her gain. She didn't question it for a second. A couple of hours and 2 very strong movers later, the Chippendale dresser was the new star of Eleanor's living room. It was even more beautiful than she remembered. She spent the entire evening polishing its lustrous surface, her fingers tracing the delicate lines, admiring the forgotten craftsmanship. As she worked, she chuckled at a peculiar detail she hadn't noticed before. On the 2 main drawers, there were small, almost cartoonish carved faces. Such whimsical details for such a serious piece, she thought, pouring herself a well-deserved cup of Earl Grey tea. She raised her cup in a silent toast to her latest, greatest acquisition. The first sign that something was amiss came late that night. A faint scratching sound, like tiny claws on wood, drifted from the living room. Eleanor was a light sleeper, but she dismissed it. The old building was always making noises, settling in for the night. Or maybe it was just a particularly ambitious mouse. But the scratching didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent. Then came faint squeaks, and the unmistakable sound of something being gnawed. With a sigh, she got out of bed, pulling on her silk robe, ready to investigate the minor disturbance. She flicked on the living room light and froze. It wasn't one mouse. It was an army of chipmunks. They poured out of the dresser drawers, a cascade of striped fur and twitching noses. They chittered in protest as the sudden light hit them, their beady eyes blinking in annoyance. And those cartoonish faces on the drawers? Eleanor stared in dawning horror. They weren't carvings. They were perfectly painted, lifelike portraits of Chip and Dale, the famous cartoon duo. And they weren't just decorative. They were cleverly designed openings, secret portals leading into the dresser's hollowed-out interior. Eleanor let out a scream that could have shattered glass. The chipmunks, initially startled by her shriek, quickly regained their composure. One, a particularly bold specimen, snatched a corner of her prized antique lace doily and scurried under the sofa with its prize. Another, with terrifying efficiency, began dismantling a neat stack of her carefully filed tax returns, shredding the papers into confetti. A third, displaying a shocking lack of respect for fine art, perched atop a priceless porcelain figurine and chittered a challenge before taking a definitive bite out of its delicate, painted ear. Her apartment, once a serene sanctuary of order and beauty, had become a war zone. The chipmunks, clearly well established in their mobile wooden fortress, saw her home as a brand new territory to conquer. They were not guests, they were invaders. They gnawed through electrical cords, creating showers of sparks that plunged her kitchen into darkness. They shredded her expensive silk curtains, using the fine fabric to line what appeared to be tiny, intricate nests woven directly into the upholstery of her Louis XIV armchairs. Her meticulously organized bookshelf, a source of immense pride, became their personal climbing frame, sending priceless first editions tumbling to the floor. Eleanor, a woman used to being in complete control, fought back with everything she had. She bought live traps, the most humane option she could find. The chipmunks treated them like a delightful puzzle, skillfully removing the bait and leaving the traps empty and sprung, as if mocking her efforts. She tried expensive, all-natural repellents, spraying them liberally around the apartment. The chipmunks seemed to enjoy the new scents, sniffing at the sprayed areas with curious twitches of their noses before continuing their campaign of destruction. In desperation, she called animal control. The operator on the other end of the line listened to her frantic explanation and then paused. "Let me get this straight, ma'am," he said, a clear note of amusement in his voice. "You have a Chippendale dresser that's full of chipmunks? Are you quite sure you're not having a strange dream?" The line went dead as he hung up, still chuckling. Eleanor was alone in her fight. Days blurred into a waking nightmare of frantic chases, escalating chaos, and the constant maddening sound of tiny claws and gnawing teeth. The chipmunks, with the instincts of seasoned foragers, discovered her pantry. It was a treasure trove for them, especially her vast collection of imported nuts and gourmet seeds. Her cupboards were ransacked, flour bags torn open, and every single surface was marked with tiny, accusing paw prints. The dresser, the piece that was supposed to be her greatest triumph, now stood as a monument to her folly. Its Chip and Dale drawers were in constant motion, opening and closing like the gates of a busy fortress, as the chipmunks sallied forth for new raids on her home. One evening, utterly defeated, Eleanor sat amidst the wreckage of her once perfect life. Shredded books, gnawed furniture, and a fine layer of dust and debris covered everything. She clutched a single miraculously unharmed teacup in her hands, a lone survivor in the battlefield. As she stared blankly at the chaos, a chipmunk, bolder than all the rest, scrambled up her leg. It stopped on her knee and peered up at her with an almost intelligent gaze. Clutched in its paws was a tiny, shredded piece of her favorite Persian rug. It let out a small squeak, but this time it didn't sound like defiance. It almost sounded like sympathy. Eleanor looked from the destruction around her to the tiny creature on her knee. She let out a long, slow sigh of resignation. It was never a Chippendale. It wasn't even a Chippendale antique. It was a trap. A very, very elaborate chipmunk trap, designed to look like an irresistible bargain. And she, Eleanor Vance, the discerning collector, had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. As another chipmunk settled in to contentedly gnaw on the leg of what was once her antique writing desk, Eleanor had to admit, through her despair, that it was a rather brilliant one at that. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of the unexpected. See you next time.